So in today's vlog, I'm going to tell you all about all the cars I've ever owned, and some of the ones I didn't own that I drove a lot, sometimes to the consternation of others. There'll be a lot of funny stories in the mix too, so hopefully you find it fun and interesting. Here we go. Ah yes, my first car, a Pontiac Astor. Mine was white like this one, but it didn't have all the fancy stripes or anything. The quick answer to how many people you can fit in this car is 8. Don't ask how I know. Car number 2 was my Buick Electra. It wasn't very pretty, and it was a gigantic beast, but it had every piece of equipment that you could possibly hope to imagine. Mine was white, not quite as pretty as this one. The next entry has a piece of my heart. It is a Ford Pinto, and I'm not sure what year it was, but this car helped me evade many an educational day. It was actually my brother's car, and I don't remember how I knew the combination, but I used to basically swipe the keys out of his locker at school. If he's watching this, he's probably going to yell at me later for telling this story. The beauty of the Ford Pinto was that ours had a huge backfire. So if I accelerated and then let my foot off the gas, it would backfire with a huge bang. So we used to drive past the gas station down at the bottom of the hill in Bath, and I'd rev it up and then let my foot off the gas, and it would be a huge explosion. And when people hear an explosion coming out of a Ford Pinto, they generally duck. And the reactions were sometimes pretty hilarious. There was also that one time where we actually had a fire in the car. What we had done is we got a cassette deck from somewhere that we never bothered to wire under the dash or anything. What we did was we just ran wires into the glove box and twisted them together and put the cassette deck in the glove box. And when we wanted to play a cassette, we would just open the glove box, stick the cassette in, close the glove box, we were happy. The problem is that we never actually wrapped the wires with tape or anything, so they were totally exposed. And one day the wires must have touched and started off a fire in the glove box. So there's smoke pouring out of the glove box, and we're all jumping out of a Ford Pinto and running as there's smoke coming out of the car. It was pretty hilarious because, of course, it's a Ford Pinto, and when there's fire in a Ford Pinto, it's not something you want. Eventually I just opened the glove box and pulled all the papers out, and then the fire went out. When we got home, we just wrapped the wires and the problem was solved. But it was a funny experience. The Dodge Omni / Plymouth Horizon. My dad probably owned a few of these as we were growing up, and I remember the fate of the last one. It broke down on the highway on my way back from Bloomsburg. Man, I made that drive many times, one time in snow that was knee deep. It was pretty crazy. This was a fun little car that was actually a lot quicker than you would think. But boy, was it jump. Most of the time, the door handles only really worked on the driver's door. Ah yes, the Mazda 323. Now this was a fun little car, and I can remember some funny stories my brother told me about one time when the gear shift came loose. Apparently he was driving down the road and the gear knob just came loose. Turns out it was just a bolt holding on the gear lever. We reached down into the transmission, pulled it out, screwed it back in, and we were ready to go. This car was so resilient. I'm pretty sure it was run without oil for weeks, and it still just kept going. This car just would not die. Until my brother wrecked it. The Nissan Pulsar. This was the first car that I ever purchased on my own. I bought it in Arizona when I was deployed there in the military. This was a fun little car. When I got my orders to go to Korea, I had to drive the car home from Arizona to Pennsylvania. This was one heck of an adventure. This was when I actually discovered that 3 of the tires were one size and 1 of the tires was a little bit smaller. So when you'd get up to highway speeds, the car had this ridiculous wobble that was just horrifying. Eventually, the tire had a meltdown in the hot sun in Texas, and I had to get it replaced, which fixed the whole problem. The only other time I stopped on this entire trip was just to take a nap on the side of the road in Texas for about 3 hours. Otherwise, I drove straight through by myself. What an adventure. When I returned from Korea, the Pulsar had pretty much kicked it. So it was time to move on to my sensible phase, being as I was going to be a father and all. So that's when I bought this, an Eagle Talon Turbo. This thing was super fast, but that's really all I could say about it. It was a little fun to drive, but it turned out it just wasn't my car. I had this one for maybe a year, probably less than that, maybe even just 6 months. My car actually had a 3-tone color scheme. So the roof was red and the sides were kind of maroonish, and then it had ground effects on it that were silver, I think. It was kind of a cool looking effect. I couldn't find a picture of the exact paint job, but it was really a neat looking car. The next sensible car I purchased was a Conquest TSI. Now this car was amazing. I loved it. It had black leather seats and all the equipment, and it was just a pretty car and a heck of a lot of fun to drive. But I think I owned this car for maybe 2 months before its reliability became an issue. So that was when I bought my first new car. It was this one here, or something similar to this one here. But this here is a Pontiac Sunbird. I had the V6 model and it made beautiful sounds. I owned this car for probably 10 years, and it literally just about fell apart by the time I was done with it. It was totally reliable up till the end, but then it started to have all kinds of electrical glitches that would just leave me stranded for no apparent reason. I'd disconnect the battery, reconnect the battery, and boom, the car would start again. Really strange. After such a long tenured ownership of that car, I was ready for something else. So I bought this Ford Focus. It's almost exactly like this one, except mine had a wing on the back of it. This car I drove for another 10 years, and then I gave it to my son, who drove it for another 4 more before he bought his own Focus. This was a good little car, and I have a lot of memories in it, but none of them are quite as interesting as some of the other stories that I've told. About this time, we also bought this car. This is a Mazda 3, and it was really probably one of the prettiest sedans made in that era. Monica drove this car and loved it. We owned this car for about 10 years, and now my daughter drives it and still loves it. And it still looks pretty good, too. This isn't the exact car, obviously, because I don't have a picture of it here, but it's pretty much the same car as this. This has always been 100% reliable and a little bit of fun to drive at least, even though it's automatic. So after 10 years of driving around a sensible car, I decided that it was time to have a little fun. And then I went out and leased my first car. It was this Honda Accord here. Now mine was in a darker color blue, and it had the V6 and a stick shift, and this car was wicked fast. I mean scary fast. It's probably the fastest car I've ever owned, and I've owned some muscle cars. But this car was just really fast, and a lot of fun to drive. The best story that I can tell about this car is we actually took this car to Disney. It was my wife, my son, my daughter, and my sister-in-law, Teresa. You may have seen her wall recently. Anyway, we were all excited. We had just gotten into downtown Disney, and I was having a little fun, you know, revving the car up and, you know, taking off the line super fast. And I got pulled over by the cops. And the funniest thing was we actually have a video of Mikey talking like Mickey Mouse saying, "Weren't you going a little fast there?" Just hilarious. After this, of course I didn't get ticketed. And when we took off again, we just couldn't start laughing about it. And there's those little memories when you go on vacations that are the ones that really stick with you. And this one has always stuck with us. It's just funny. The Dodge Challenger. This was my first muscle car. It was a pretty nice car. I just love the sound of this one. But the big problem was, it just wasn't any fun to drive. It drove like a big giant boat, floated everywhere, and the sound system was just horrible. I owned this car for about 6 months. The next car I had was my little blue BRZ. We had a lot of fun in this car. My wife and I took a really nice trip to Maine in this one, and it was just a blast. I really loved driving this car, which is why I bought this. This car right here is a BRZ Series Blue. Needless to say, it's not blue, it's white. But it had blue accents all over the interior, and it had a fake carbon fiber interior look to it. It also had different wheels and ground effects that made it kind of unique, and I loved the white pearl color. It was really a nice looking car, and just as much fun to drive as my first BRZ, although I don't think it was ever quite as fast as the first one. My beloved Mustang. I truly love this car. I enjoy driving it. I like everything about it. The sound system is amazing. The way it integrates with my phone and all my other technology is just fantastic. Even my wife loves this car, and there's a lot of cars on this list that she was not a fan of. One of my biggest nightmares is that I won't find a job before I end up having to sell this beauty. I just bought it about 3 months ago, and I really love it. Believe it or not, there's about 3 notable exceptions that are not on this list. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Hello, fellow YouTubers. If you like what you've seen on my channel, please subscribe here. It goes a long way towards helping new viewers find my channel. Also, if you want to watch the last video I created, you can get that right here. And please leave me a comment. I love to interact with my viewers. Let me know how I'm doing.